It is Sunday, November 16th, and I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Lisa McIsaac. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Today, I thought we could hop on and talk about the new immigration levels plan for Canada and how this is going to impact not only pathways for permanent residency for future applicants, but just overall, how is the system going to change from where it's been and where it's going to go for temporary residents, for students, for workers, for people that are moving to Canada for the first time, and then also like how people are going to get permanent residence these days if you're not, say, married to a Canadian citizen or in a relationship with a common law partner, for example. So we could talk about that to just start off. I mean, what were your thoughts when you initially heard about the new numbers for the 2026 to 2028 Canada immigration plan?
Yeah, well, Chris, honestly, like I was so amazed at how much of a cut it was in some of the categories. Like that was honestly shocking, right? Like there was some really big cuts. Um I thought that I don't think that it's like we talked a little bit about this before. Like I don't think it's short-sighted necessarily, but it is a lot lower than what I had expected. And I think people like I just want to put it out there to the podcast world that I'm new at this and I have only been practicing this in the golden age of immigration, where the doors were literally wide open and there were hundreds of thousands of people coming here as students, as permanent residents. And so I'm interested in your thoughts as well and like what it looks like to work in this field as well in a more austere sort of environment, right? So if for me it was shocking, maybe for you it's not quite the same.
I mean, I guess there's a little bit of truth to that. We were all expecting a reduction in the overall numbers that was being sort of broadcasted even
Mhm.
before these plans came out.
Totally.
Um, It's not necessarily the reductions that have me surprised. It's the other areas that seem to be almost, like highlighted, and then you have little glimpses of like, oh, well, what's this pathway all about? That's an increase even from last year. So the on the one hand, the overall numbers are dropping, but in little certain categories, they're increasing. You know, if you
Hmm.
look at the French language draws,
Oh, totally.
they're going to continue on, and that has been the story of 2025. I think we've already invited 18,000 people in 2025 alone for French, and that trend is going to continue all throughout the next 3 years. So there's one little part about that I was like, okay, that's interesting that they're going to prioritize French, even though if they're going to decrease the overall numbers. And then the second one, you'll probably guess because I'm a big fan of these programs, are the PNP classes, right?
Yes. Yes.
92,000 basically in the next 3 years. There's a low target, a high target, then a mid. So they could have up to over 100,000 and then as low as 80,000. Um, and that represents, so if you look at the breakdown of PMPs versus the total economic class, it's about 40% of all of the economic immigration is going to come through the PNP, the provincial nominee program. So what do you think
Yeah.
about that? And is that something that's trending right now on the blogs, on the social media, and stuff like this?
Yeah. So, you know, what's interesting is that, yes, I think that's really cool. I think that it's cool that that the PMPs are going to be a pathway again, you know, for people to get through. What I'm hearing mostly on the blogs, though, like the Ontario PMP is making lots of waves, and um, I mean, just read this morning. I don't know. I haven't read the actual announcement, but I did see it on LinkedIn that they're going to cancel and refund all of those trades applications, right, for the skilled trades through the
Really?
ONIP. Yeah.
So they actually accepted the applications and now they're refunding and saying no.
Yep, they're saying no and refunding, and they're clearing out that they're clearing it out.
I've
So
actually never heard of that happening before. That's so interesting. Wow. I mean, that must be heartbreaking for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, while we're talking, or if you have something to add, I'll look it up so that we can actually like talk about that. But it did make me think, what's the purpose for that? Is that to readjust? Is that to reload? Is that even based on the immigration plan that just came out from the federal government? Are
Right.
they making space for more programs? Like what, anyway.
Well, it could be. I mean, the other interesting thing too is there's been talk on the federal government side of things about trying to transition those construction workers into PR pathways on the federal level.
Hmm.
So it's possible that the Ontario government knows something that we don't, and they're saying, well, these guys are going to be permanent residents anyway. We're going to free up space in our quota because that's how it works. The provinces get a number to fulfill each year, and they're going to say, well, we're going to
Mm.
prioritize these people over these ones because the construction workers will already have a pathway in the federal system. So
Chris, that's
I
so cool. That's wow. That's kind of interesting.
well, I'm just speculating.
Of
I mean, I'm,
course.
because from Ontario's point of view, they don't want to lose construction workers. That's not the point. Like, why
Yeah.
would you say, "Oh yeah, we don't want whatever 25,000 more construction workers in Ontario"? Like, we have to build homes. We hear the federal government talk about this all the time, so they need them. But I think the federal government has been in such a sort of a back behind the doors conversations with the provinces about many different things, and one of them is trying to give back control to the provinces for their immigration pathways. The provinces
Yes.
have talked about that for like years. They've talked about it, wanting more control who comes into their provinces. And the federal government was, no, 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 we'll decide. We'll have the programs. You guys, the little provinces, you'll get your little allocations and that's it. But because the numbers now for the PMP classes increased from
Mhm.
basically 75,000 to 91,000, there's an extra 20,000 spots, uh, you know, allocated. So maybe 5% increase for all the provinces. That's sending a clear signal that they want them to be back in control. So they're listening to them for the first time. And because of that,
100%.
I really think that people like the Ontario government are strategizing. They're saying, okay, well, now that we know what's up, the plan for next year is to do this and um, transition as many people as we possibly can, right? Because that's what they want.
Yeah. Gosh,
Um,
that's so interesting.
yeah, but the PMP programs in general are exciting for most people who are in that stage of immigrating to Canada because they've been dead for a year. That's the first thing you have to remember. They've been basically non-existent. So if you're new to the system, if you're new to the journey, you don't even know what these programs do or what they're about and how they work. So that's going to be something I'm going to be posting a lot on in the coming weeks, and also when they open up in 2026. Mainly for me, the BC PMP is my bread and butter because I'm on the West Coast, and that's typically where I see most of the employers and the applicants that I deal with. And it's also for me, it's the easier system to understand. That's the other
Yeah.
thing about the PMPs. They're so tricky sometimes to understand how they work, except for the fact that they all do the same thing. They all resolve in the same outcome, which is you get the nomination. And then you get to apply for permanent residency. I always think of the PMPs like the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory movie where
Hmm.
they're opening the chocolate bars and they get the golden ticket. And the golden ticket is all they need. Like they're like, yeah, we got the golden ticket. I mean, that's what the PMP nomination does, right?
For sure. For sure. For sure. I found it. So it was released yesterday or on the 14th. It says here they've identified systemic misrep or fraud in the skilled trade stream. As currently structured, they have suspended receiving any skilled trades applications and will return all outstanding skilled trades stream applications. Applications that are returned will have their fees refunded.
Oh, so maybe they're just saying, listen, we're not returning all the applications, only the ones that appear to be misrepped.
No, it says all outstanding.
Okay. But the justification was because we found some fraud in some of them, we're going to cancel all of them.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh,
In particular, the review identified systemic misrep. These issues affect the ability of the director to appointed under the Immigration Act to determine whether they meet the eligibility criteria.
Right. Okay. So they're like basically saying because we can't assess them properly, we need to start over.
Yeah,
So
so
that
that's really interesting because that means that obviously that's why they're pausing intake too, because obviously the system itself, they can't identify the fraud accurately. They
yeah.
can't. The system isn't working, so they'll have to overhaul somehow.
I mean, surprise, surprise, the system isn't working. Wow.
Anyway, yeah. So about the plan, like that popped up this morning, and there's going to be a lot of disappointed people. I had heard people talking about that a little bit, saying, a couple bad eggs kind of ruin it for everyone. But this press release seems to say that it's really quite systemic. So it would have to be pretty serious, wouldn't it, in order for them to actually can the whole program?
Yeah, I mean, so serious that it's probably been allowed to happen up to a certain point. Because if that's the norm, if people are applying with knowing misrep, then there was a pathway before that that was happening, and now
Hmm.
it's not. So they're cracking down on it, trying to get in control of everything. Um, I think Ontario stands to benefit the most from this increased PMP number. Not only they're the biggest province, but they also have the industrial economic base. So they're when we're talking about when Canada's economy swings from low unemployment to high unemployment, they feel it the worst. So
Definitely.
they need, I mean, and vice versa. So we're creating more jobs right now, and there's going to be a need for workers eventually, and they can't just like say suddenly just muster them out of thin air. They need to have a base of temporary residents that they can rely on. So I mean, the same is true for all provinces, but Ontario, I think, in particular, stands in the best position to benefit from these new targets, and they're here to stay. I mean, if you look at the PMP draws, they're not letting up throughout the next 3 years, and they basically stand at 40% of the overall economic immigration.
Yeah.
So having said that, the other 60% will be coming still through express entry, and they have housed it as the federal high skilled worker category on the immigration level plans. But really, what that means is anybody who's an express entry, because as you know, Lisa, when you enter express entry, you have to have skilled work, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So in that category of federal high skilled worker in the express entry system, we're going to have the Canadian experience class as the primary pathway for that. And also the category draws. Can't forget about those. The ones that target healthcare workers, trades, STEM draws, education. So we don't actually have a breakdown of those categories. They haven't, declared that. But I guess what I'm saying is that we're seeing these numbers mean that we're going back to normal. And what is
Hmm.
normal? What? Let me ask you. You're new to the game. What would be normal?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it's interesting that you said normal, right? Because this is my normal, right? My normal is literally the doors are wide open. So I mean, normal for me, when you say normal, it doesn't just mean within immigration, because what is the driver of coming back to normalcy or normalcy within the immigration program? Is it unemployment? Is it housing? Like, it really is this entire basket that we're trying to either empty or fill with different things. And it's what's the driver? So what's normal? Like, where rent is normal and people can find jobs and they can find housing, is that the normal, right? So
Well, I guess what I mean is, shouldn't we have a system that you can predict, that you can
mm,
navigate with a bit more certainty, instead of saying, "Oh well, I'm going to choose this pathway," and then wake up tomorrow and be like, "Well, that's a dead end," because like what
so
happens in the
that's
past
really
is yeah.
yes, that's really interesting. And you know what switched like that was, I feel like one day people went to sleep thinking that they could enter Express Entry with their skilled work and their scores of 490. And then they woke up and they were like, I better learn French to a level 7. That was literally like from day to night. People just realized that express entry door was shut, and they woke up the next day and everybody's learning French. Like that's just the only other viable pathway that was available to them. So I mean, that to me, if it stays like that and follows this plan, then that's a predictable trajectory, I guess. But it was kind of just such a wild swing. It's just like hundreds and hundreds or thousands of people realize that they are no longer eligible based on what we were
Yeah.
doing. You know, is that kind of in the vein of what you were saying? Like it's
Well,
just
yeah, I
swinging.
mean, I guess what I mean is that if you look at the historical draws of express entry in the last 10 years or so, never before have we had a cutoff score above consistently above 500. It's only
Mm-hmm,
been in the last 18 months that that's
mm-hmm,
happened. So if you look at the type of profile that you have to get a score above 500, it really does limit like a lot of people. So it closes the door for most people, which is why they're running to pathways like French, because
mm-hmm,
they'll never get up there. So for me, a normal program would be something that returns the scores back to 450 to 475. And I mean, obviously we can't just do that right now because we would have way too many applicants come in,
mm-hmm.
and that would be way over the 109,000 target that we have for this year. But you can start chipping away at that. And the way you do that is you limit now the amount of newcomers to Canada for the temporary
Mm-hmm.
resident side of things. So you're closing the door off on the temporary resident side, and you're chipping away at that big pool of temporary residents in Canada, trying to transition them back to permanent residency. And I mean, in theory, the scores should start dropping down. So you would have even like, and this is what I tell people: if you are even expired on your work permit, but you still have the say 2 years of Canadian work experience, you still get to be in those draws, even if you have to go back to your home country. So those temporary residents that are in Canada right now are not necessarily in Canada. They're people that are in Canada, but also outside Canada that have the CEC designation. So they're sitting in express entry in their home country at 489 or 490,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they will become permanent residents, just not right away, right? The only way that they wouldn't is if their work experience expires, and that happens after 3 years.
So
So
they have
that's
3 years from leaving Canada. Their Canadian experience, class work experience, is still valid. So
yeah,
really, this like reduction in numbers is a 3 to 5, 10 year plan, really, because we're
yes,
slowly going to chip away at all these.
yes,
They'll expire, they'll return, they'll withdraw,
yes.
like all of these different. Mm-hmm.
But my point being is like even if they expire their status and they leave Canada, they still have more points than someone that's trying to enter for the first time. So
Yeah,
they
100%.
still will be the better applicant for the lower draws. And that's the interesting part about the system is like it's not this is not a sign that newcomers to Canada have a better pathway than people that are already
Mm-hmm.
here. Definitely, because of the way the system works, the people that are already here have more points, have more better criteria to assess them. So they are, better applicants. Whether they're in Canada or not actually doesn't matter,
It's true.
right?
It's
So
true.
that begs the question then, Lisa, I'll bounce it back to you. So if you're someone that's just starting the journey and you are that person that's outside Canada, let's say you come from the States, right? And you are now trying to immigrate to Canada, you're competing. This is what I'll tell people on the discovery calls. You're competing against people who have master's degrees from Canada. You're competing
Mm-hmm.
against people that are younger than you, that have more work experience in Canada than you do. So how do you then, I guess, honestly tell somebody what the reality is, and then us create a pathway for them? So take for example that blog that you're reading.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that if I was to have to tell somebody about their path, I think that it depends on where they're coming from initially, right? Like there's so many different criteria that you have to eliminate. You've always said when we've worked together that it's kind of just a waiting game, right? So arriving here is key. Number one, job offers are really important. And you've pointed that out, especially if PR is the goal, a job offer is like number one, right? That's just what we have to work on. And there's all those programs that exist under the International Mobility Program. So, you know, if they're from countries that have agreements, then they, with a job offer, they can come up here. They don't necessarily need an LMIA, you know, CUSMA, the Transatlantic Partnerships. So, and then there's the working holiday visa, you know, especially if you're a younger person under 35, the working holiday is like classic way to start to get that Canadian experience. And then, of course, there's studies. So one of my favorite ways to advise people is if they already have an undergraduate degree, doing a master's program or a PhD program here is so critical, right? Because you get that high level Canadian experience class, and you get that that postgraduate work permit, and your family gets work permits, which is really important under that program. So yeah, and just aiming for that Willy Wonka moment that you talked about, right? Seeing if you can drive yourself into the Willy Wonka zone and get the golden ticket of the provincial nomination.
Yeah, and then your point about you know, having to map out a stepping stone pathway to permanent residency, I think is what the message is, because you're not applying for permanent residency when you first come to Canada, and that's when people on these Reddit blogs or when they're phoning discovery calls from overseas, they're like, "Hey, look, I was doing some research, and I'm eligible for the federal express or federal skilled worker pathway for express entry." And of course, they'll read online about, oh, if you're in a federal skilled worker category, you can be eligible for express entry, and then they just equate that to I get to become a permanent resident. They don't
Mm-hmm.
know how the draws work and everything. But so because there's so much information online, you think, oh, I have a pathway to PR through the federal skilled worker program. And then you have to sort of bring them back down to earth and say, well, wait a minute. No, you don't, because there's getting into the system's one thing, and then getting enough points is another thing altogether. So then you have to
Mm-hmm.
make this pathway say, oh, how will I get points? So if I think about our immigration system, at least express entry, as a really fancy nightclub in Vegas or New York or something. And you want to get in, right? You want to be selected to come in. But there's a huge waiting line outside. And there's a bouncer at the front of the door, right? So and then everybody in the line, you'd think that if you are next in line, you should be able to come next in. But that's not how express entry works. Every
No,
5 minutes, the bouncer goes up and down the line and he says, oh, I'm going to select you and you and you based on these criteria that I'm making up, right?
yeah,
I mean, we could get into like, we could make the analogy really fun and, you know, only the best looking people or whatever, you know, because it's a fancy
for
nightclub,
sure.
or maybe the
Yep.
people that have the most money. But so it's not really a fair system that way, even though it kind of is fair because our immigration system is skills based. We're not hiding behind
Yeah.
that. It's always been that way.
Yeah.
So we're all in a nightclub lineup and we all want to be selected to come in the nightclub. And if you enter Canada for the first time, if you're starting this journey as someone that's trying to immigrate to Canada and you're like thinking, okay, I have 400 points, right? What do I do? And then you they get on the phone with someone like yourself or myself, and I say, well, 400 points will never be enough. Even if the system resets itself down to the levels of 450 for the draws, it'll never be enough. So then they're like, well, how do I get more points? How do I get more points? And that's where you're talking about the study pathway. You're talking about the
Yeah.
work permit, you know, job offer stuff. You're talking about the PMP classes. You're talking about French, for example. And that then we're in it. We're in the strategizing for what is the best pathway to come to Canada. I've always been a big fan of study pathways, even if you're a professional. Like that
Mm-hmm.
blog that you were referring me to about the pilots from the
Mm-hmm.
States. I mean, that was
Yeah.
what is the background there?
So that what Chris is referring to is we were on Reddit, and there's some really great immigration you know, subreddits. And this one was about Americans looking to relocate to Canada. So it's the partner, so the person, 28, and her partner, 26, are looking at options to relocate to Canada. The background is aviation, and they are both licensed commercial pilots as well as flight instructors. They believe that their tier code is 72600. Which I would find hard to believe. Actually, do you think that that's accurate? Would aviation be under the 7.2? Would it be a tier 2?
We do a quick
That's
check.
interesting. Anyway, they have a Bachelor of Science from a university in the United States. They have experience working as flight instructors, and based on what they can find, flying instructors was listed under one of the tier categories of experience. They have submitted ECA applications to be processed. So ECA applications are they want their education credentials to be equated to Canadian education credentials. And they're also taking CELPIP, which is the language test, and they're looking to get their documents ready for their express entry. So their goal is hopefully to get an ITA and if successful, they want to convert their licenses to Transport Canada and start applying to Canadian Airlines for their first officer positions. Based on the CRS calculators, they're looking at a high 400s, which they understand is low. So they're trying to figure out which options would be best. They said they have had a free consultation and they have a chance, but based on what I can find, it's quite difficult. ChatGPT says it looks good for me. But we all know what ChatGPT.
Well, I guess this is it. I mean, this is that what we're talking about. Like, what is their chance? Like, who's told them they have a chance at 400? I don't understand that. The chance would have to be based on a job offer, right? So we look at the NOC. Just to confirm, it is the right NOC. It's flight instructors are 72600. So even if this couple gets their licenses in order, they get the Transport Canada license, that doesn't give them more points. That doesn't give them the right to work in Canada. So they have to get either an LMIA supported job offer through the temporary foreign worker program, or they need to go through the exemptions for the LMIAs. And I'm not even sure there are exemptions for pilots and flight instructors. There could be under CUSMA or USMCA, but I'm not entirely sure.
I'm going to have a look right now.
So if there was, like, let's say, it doesn't actually matter if there, well, I mean, it might matter because the employer would have an easier pathway, but your journey starts with what employer will be hiring me, right? Because I need work experience in Canada. Once they get their 1 year of work in Canada, their score jumps above 500. And so they will have,
like that's so important. It's like, it's literally crucial. Like, it's crucial. It just illustrates the point of what you said. It's okay to be sitting outside the country, but like, it literally is a game changer.
Yeah.
To bring it in. To bring your experience here.
So we're not talking about, when will I become PR or what's my pathway PR? We're talking about who is your employer in Canada? Like, how are you going to get a job offer? So now let's back it up again. Like, what happens if I don't get a job offer? And so what's the strategy now? So what would you say, Lisa? I'm quizzing you now. If I can't find a job, but I'm determined to come.
I mean, yeah, like there's a couple of being a US citizen, if they're determined to come and they can't find a job offer while in the United States, then I would say, you have to come up here and network, I guess.
I'm going to add one more information. So they have to get work experience. We know that, like, that's their pathway to PR. They have to get work experience, but they can't find a job offer. What's your strategy? What's your suggestion?
So, yeah, then I guess my strategy would be twofold. It would be to get an open work permit. And so there's two ways to get that open work permit. Am I on the right track?
Yeah.
To get the open work permit. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, they'd have to get the open work permit, and there's two ways to get that. So they could continue or retrain or something up here at a DLI, at a designated learning institution, get that open work permit, start getting that work experience while they're training. And then the other way is that there are designated organizations that will do working holiday, and these kids are young enough, these folks are young enough, they're still under 30. So they could technically explore that option too and come up with an open work permit from the US.
I like it. I like both those suggestions, except the second one with the ROs, for US citizens, they're only going to get 1 year permits. So they have to really
Yes.
have those job offers lined up before they enter, because you know how it works. Even if you get 10 months and 29
Hmm.
days of experience, you're still not counted as 1 year. That means nothing. It means
Yep.
nothing until it's
Yep.
one
That
year.
is true.
So you don't want
Okay.
to risk, not finding your job offer right away. You'd rather come up with your work permit ready to go, starting work on day one and working for a year. And then you've assured yourself the 1 year of skilled work. Yeah, so how do you get open work permits in Canada? That's, I guess, the question that you would want to ask and answer if you were someone that is like these people. And as about as anybody, the easiest pathway to open work permit is through a study option, and that's essentially why we
Hmm.
have a large amount of study or students coming to Canada at the post-secondary level, because it's not because they want to all get MBAs in Carleton University or whatever. I mean, that's wonderful, but it's not like there's
It's true.
that's they want to go spend $65,000 and get an MBA. They would much rather just immigrate to Canada. So they're trying to get work permits. That's what they're trying to do. So the the strategy for me for a couple like this would say, okay, well, first of all, pound the pavement for job offers. You're a U.S. citizen. You can come up as a visitor.
Hmm.
You don't have to.
Exactly.
You don't have to get a visa to come to Canada, and you're in a very niche market. You're in a flight instructors are I'm sure they're common, but when you go to small towns in whatever Ontario, BC, or Alberta, they're not going to have that
Hmm.
many. And I'm a pilot actually. I flew airplanes when I
Well, and
was
on
really young, so I know that there is shortages
really,
of flight instructors. Yeah, yeah. I got my pilot's license when I was
yeah. So that
16.
that no, that's so cool. My neighbor here, he's an anesthesiologist at the hospital, and he also has his pilot's license. He got it when he was really young. It was just like a cool thing. And my dad used to have a pilot's license, and we used to fly all over Alberta in his little Cessna. It was so much fun.
Yeah, and I tried to do some upgrading. I'm going to talk about
Yeah.
this for a minute, but upgrading about 2 years ago to do relicense, and the flight school was so busy they didn't have enough hours for you to
Hmm.
book. They had to book out like through 2 months in advance. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like a flight instructor is really that hard to come by. But I think they're like an entry. They're actually an entry level
So
job.
that's interesting because it's actually interesting because, and when I was looking up the Kuzma stuff online here, it says that while pilot is not explicitly on the general Kuzma professions list, the agreement does have special provisions in Canadian aviation regulations allowing citizens or corporations of the US to obtain authorization to operate flight training services in Canada.
Wow, I'd look into that.
Cool,
Because
hey?
yeah,
Um,
I bet you that's more geared towards though. Um, like almost like a business visitor. So if you're an American company that is contracted to do something in Canada, like flight training, like let's like
mm,
take a military, trainer person to come up and instruct, the military on how to fly airplanes or whatever, they would have an exemption for that.
oh
Or
yeah,
if it's
maybe.
Air Canada, like they're doing training or whatever, um, I'm not entirely sure it would be something that you could do without having a contract in place. So you can't just pop up and say, I'm an instructor. Now I want to just go work for
No, for
myself
sure.
and I don't know who I'm going to have as a client, right? I don't think that would be the case. That's typically not how it works. But okay, let's back up and just go through the scenario again. So the guy wants a work permit to come to Canada, but you can't find a job offer. So my first advice is like continue to look for job offers. You can come to Canada as a visitor. You wouldn't say at the border, I'm going to look for work, because that's inaccurate. You're not actually looking for work. You're up here exploring your future by making connections with some possible people that might be interested in hiring you. You're not actually applying for anything. So when you come to Canada with that intention, you could actually come in as a business visitor. You could say, listen, I am self-employed flight instructor. I'm coming to Canada to do some networking with some other schools. I'm not applying for any jobs. I'm going back to the United States in 2 weeks from now, but I'm up here. I just want you to know I'm up here, like not for pleasure. I'm up here for some sort of business opportunity that I might. think about doing in the future. And that covers your butt a little bit, because if in the future, if someone says, well, I entered as a visitor in last year, but then I found a job offer while I was here on a visitor, they will say, well, you came to Canada and you told us you were a tourist, and you were actually, here doing something else, and they could make you inadmissible for that. So I've always said, for like, we do the same thing for entrepreneurs when they come over and look for businesses and they want to buy businesses. You say, I'm entering as a business visitor, and that way you're just protected on a little bit of a level, so that if you, in the future you do get an opportunity, you can say, well, I declared that right up front. So that's my first
Yeah.
piece of advice, is don't stop the job search, because that's ultimately going to warp you up to the work permit stage anyway. And then you get the 1 year of skilled work, and then you can go into express entry with a high score. But if you can't find the job offer, then yeah, you have to go back to the study option. And the study option is interesting if you're married, as you know. Break it down for me. How's that work if you're married?
With the study option,
Yeah.
you're referring to the spousal open work permits? Yeah.
Well,
So
okay,
with the
you've jumped right into
study
it, but I want
option,
you to break down the eligibility criteria for spousal open work permits
oh
for
boy.
spouses of students.
Well, it used to be that anybody studying anything basically was able to apply for spousal and family work permits and open study permits and stuff, but they've really kind of clamped down on that. It's master's and PhD level,
Yes.
and
So okay, so
possibly some.
PhD masters, if you're the spouse of a student at the PhD or master's level, you get a work permit. That's a guarantee. Okay, so then what?
Yes,
What are the other ones?
that's a guarantee. Good question, Chris. I've only ever really focused on the master's and PhD level stuff. Is there technical training, like some technical training stuff that allows for that?
Almost, almost. I'll give you the answer. So there is professional degree programs. So
Okay.
nurses,
Oh yeah. Hmm.
anesthesiologists, like people that are in the healthcare sector, have to get licensed. Teachers. So if you're doing a B.Ed program, right? That's another one. So when your degree,
Cool.
if you're doing an undergraduate degree, and that degree leads you to a professional designation, architecture,
Hmm.
education, healthcare, then that's the exemption to that rule. So when you're doing study pathway planning, you're not looking for 1 or 2 year diploma programs. They're not going to work if you're married. The whole reason why you want to study is
No.
so that your spouse can get an open work permit. In this hypothetical situation, if they're both
Hmm.
pilots, one guy kind of goes into the study pathway, say they do a master's in some related field of, um, I don't know if there's master's degree programs for flight instructors, but there might be something like that would be suitable for a pilot to take on a master's level. And then the spouse gets the open work permit,
Yeah.
and now they're working. They're working away while the other person's going to school, accumulating work experience in Canada. That boom, once they get their 1 year, now we have 515 points, and now we apply for permanent residency. So I would map that out back to them on the initial call and say, if you want the high score, you need 1 year of work experience. How do you get that? Well, here's an option. You could come to Canada on this date. One person enrolls in school, the other person gets a work permit, and you're off to the races, because the plan is then mapped out for you. Now, what's the other
Yeah.
interesting thing about U.S. citizens? What advantage do they have over everyone else when they're applying for work permits, Lisa? I'm going to give you another quiz.
Oh my gosh, Chris. I don't know. Like, I mean, the advantage. So they are applying for work permits. The
Work
advantage
and
that they
study
have.
permits. Think about the process of applying. What do they have in terms of advantages?
Well, so that's a good question. Do they need to do the same kind of like credential assessments for English and
All that applies. All
their
the
education?
same level of documentation and assessment applies. What I'm referring to, I'm going to give you a big hint, is the process of applying itself.
Sure.
So, the process of applying itself.
Oh, Yeah. So are you talking about like being able to apply from within, or outside of the, or at the border, is activating
There it
the
is. We call that the
work
port
permit
of
actually
entry,
at the
right?
border?
They can
Yeah.
apply at port of entry at the land border in person. So a usual
Yeah.
work permit application, even a study permit application, will take months to process online. For anyone else in the
Yeah.
world, if they want to
Yeah.
come to study in Canada, they have to apply online before they enter Canada, and that could take 2 or 3 months to process. But a U.S. citizen can show up at the border with a letter of acceptance from the school and a bank statement showing they have enough money, along with, all the other documents that
And
you
get
would
it.
say you need, your resume, your education credential assessments,
Hmm.
a statement of purpose if you need all that. And then boom, they get a study permit. And then right after that, your spouse can say, "Hey, I'm the spouse, by the way. I want a work permit." And boom, they get a work permit. So that's a huge advantage because
Yeah.
you
Like we're
skip the
talking a difference of like,
months, like six
yeah,
months
like
of
you're like six
processing, right?
hours in line. Yeah.
And I
Rather than
find
6
too
months. Yeah.
that when you apply in
It's,
person, you're actually cutting right down to the chase. You're getting an officer to make a decision without even looking at the whole spectrum of documentation. So there's way less preparation going on. You just basically show up with your documents, and then they'll ask you, they'll say, "Oh, can I see your letter of acceptance?" "Okay, how do you plan on paying for this?" "Oh, I've got a large amount of savings." "Oh, really? Well, show me a screenshot." There it is. "Welcome to Canada. Here's your permit for 3 years." Right? That it's as simple as
so
that,
true.
where you know how they work online. We've spent like how many hours preparing study permit applications that just seem to be
Yeah.
so complex and layered. So US citizens have a
Hmm.
huge advantage there, applying for work and study permits at port of entry.
And realistically, we can spend months putting applications together, and then realistically the officer could take 5 to 10 minutes looking at it.
Well, they do. We know they do. Like there was a colleague that I used to keep in touch with a while ago who was big on the Freedom of Information Act requests. You know how you can do that and ask the government for all their records about this and that.
Yep.
So he wanted to know how long it takes officers to process, on average, permanent residence applications for spouses. So spousal sponsorship applications. He wanted to know actually how many like hours it takes an officer to make a decision on a file. And the answer he got was, I think it was either 12 minutes or 18 minutes. 12 or 18 minutes it takes for a person to make a decision on an application. And then the processing time for that is, the overall processing time is over a year. And it's only going to take 18 minutes to make a decision. So that tells you something about how backlogged the system is, right?
Yeah, 100%. I wanted to mention that, just something, because we've been talking about the immigration levels plan.
Oh no, we lost Lisa. I'll see if I can get her reconnected. Hang a minute.